It's your friendly neighborhood Spider Dan. To get straight to the point, Yae Miko is not a well-designed character. And I'm not talking about her appearance, trust me. You know she's hot, I know she's hot, we all know she's hot. No, this is about her gameplay, which, in my objective opinion, and yes, I said that correctly, is subpar even at her best. To make this a bit more simple to understand, anyone who's ever played Raiden and Miko should realize instantly which of the two characters has more depth. I understand that obviously not everyone has Raiden, so I'll use a few other examples too. So first, we can look at Raiden's talent and burst. And you can see just from the pure amount of text, especially on the burst, that there's a lot of stuff going on. I'm not going to read it all just because most people should already know at least generally how she works, but I will go over her two passives. So her first one is that when any party members gain elemental orbs or particles, Chakra Desiderata gains 2 resolve stacks. And that has something to do with her burst. So you've already got some synergy between her first passive and her burst and also her E, because her E is going to be what's creating a lot of these orbs and particles feeding into her burst. And her second passive, each 1% above 100% energy recharge that Raiden Shogun possesses grants her this stuff, which, I mean, that's amazing because not only do you want energy recharge in order to have her burst back as quick as possible, but now it also increases the damage that you do and gives you even more energy restoration. For another much earlier example, let's take a look at Mona. So obviously her E skill isn't the best, but it's not horrible and it works fairly well in her kit simply because it's a taunt, and I mean a taunt can be pretty good in anyone's kit, but especially more so in a ranged character's kit, which is good for Mona. And she also has her burst, which is it's one of the more harder to understand bursts in the game, how it exactly works, but anybody who does know how it works knows that it's not super complicated. It's also important to note that both of her passives here feed directly into her talents in some way. So with Illusory Torrent, every 2 seconds, if there are opponents nearby, she will create a phantom, which is basically a smaller mirror reflection of Doom, which doesn't taunt enemies. And her second passive, hydro damage bonus by 20% of her energy recharge, which means that you should want to build energy recharge, meaning you'll have her burst up more often, but also that you'll get hydro damage, so her burst will both be up more often and it will do more damage. And now let's take a look at Yae Miko. So no one really has anything special on their normal attacks, or I would have gone over them when I went over the other people. So let's just head on to the skills here. So her first skill is a turret. It's 3 turrets with a short cooldown, so you can place them all within a quick amount of time, and they last for 14 seconds. And also, I believe, as it says here, yep, when other turrets are nearby, these turrets, they increase the damage dealt total. As long as you have 3 turrets next to each other and they're all connected in usually a triangle, they will be doing the maximum amount of damage. Now, her burst is a giant electro strike, and it will add 3 extra strikes if the 3 turrets are placed down. So it adds an extra strike for each turret that's placed down. You can add 1 strike if you have 1, 2 if you have 2, and then usually you'll have 3 extra strikes, especially since this is the damage of the initial strike, 468, and this is the damage of subsequent strikes from consuming the turrets. And there's a cooldown of 22 seconds. Now, when we take a look at her passives, we can see that using her burst, it resets the cooldown for each turret depending on how many turrets you broke. So if you broke all 3, then it'll refresh all 3 for you. So what you usually end up doing is you place down 3 turrets, you burst, and then you instantly have to again. For second passive, Enlightened Blessing, every point of elemental mastery Yae Miko possesses will increase Seisho Sakura damage by 0.15%. So let's say that Yae Miko gains 200 elemental mastery from a medium investment sucrose. She will then gain 30% damage increase for her turrets for however long that elemental mastery buff lasts. Otherwise, you have to build into elemental mastery. So with the 40 I have here, I'm obviously not building into it, but out of just this 40, I am getting a 6% increase to the turret's damage. The main problem with Miko is that she feels uninspired compared to the rest of the characters. She places down her turrets, which just deal damage, and then she swaps off until her turrets disappear. The only splash of creativity in her entire kit is the fact that she gets her turrets refreshed whenever she uses her burst. Another character very similar to Miko is Fischl. She places down a turret and then swaps off the field until you need her again, and her burst is a quick, one-time kind of use thing. However, I would argue that Fischl is much more versatile and much more fun than Miko. Her E skill is instantly placed compared to Miko's 2 or 3 seconds of spamming E, and Fischl's burst can be used to move around, as well as it refreshing the duration of her E without having to place the E back down. And if you include constellations as part of her base kit, which I think isn't too outlandish for a 4-star character, she heals HP during her burst, and whenever Oz is active, he does a joint attack with your active character's normal attack to deal a small amount of electro damage, which makes Fischl an even better electro applicator than she already was. So, how do we fix Miko? Well, don't worry, Hoyoverse. Luckily for you, I'm a certified genius, and I've come up with a couple different paths you could take in order to sell 2 or 3 times the amount of Miko on her next banner than you did on her first banner. Which, by the way, let me remind you, didn't do too well. It didn't even beat the sales for the Eula and Albedo rerun. But enough of that, let's talk fixes. Option 1. Keep her as strictly a sub DPS. Hoyoverse could take this path if they're dead set on keeping Yae Miko as a sub DPS who's only swap to place her turrets and burst, which, by the way, I have no problem with. There are too few roles that characters can be placed in the first place, so I'm perfectly fine with Yae being a sub DPS. I'm perfectly fine with that role existing in the first place. So, let's see what we would change to do this. Her burst already refreshes her E, and if you take a look at her C1, it makes it so that every time her burst gets an extra lightning strike from the turret's noble sacrifices, Miko gains 8 energy. Usually meaning she'll get 24 energy back after every burst, putting her on an easier track to her next burst. So let's take this idea of refreshing things and absolutely sprint with it. First of all, we need to make her current C1 part of her base kit, found in the description of her burst. Next, make it have team-wide effects. Her burst already has the longest cooldown in the game, by 2 seconds, not to mention it's tied for the highest cost in the game with Raiden's at 90. So why not throw in a bunch of strong effects? Right now, all it does is damage. First, let's have all teammates get 8 energy per turret destroyed. If that's a bit too strong, you could make it 8 for all electro characters and only 4 or 6 for all the other elements. Next, refresh the cooldown of all teammates' E skills. Upon first hearing this, you might think it sounds even more broken than my last point, but consider this. There's a bare minimum of 22 seconds between each of Miko's bursts, meaning that even the longest cooldowns in the game, say Xingqiu's E skill with 21 seconds of cooldown, will not be able to benefit from this stupid crazy amount. If you use Xingqiu's E and then swap to Miko first and then swap back to Xingqiu and use his E, there's now a 21-second cooldown on about both the skill and Miko's burst, meaning that in 21 seconds, you could have Xingqiu use his skill basically twice in a row again. I really don't think this would be the most OP thing that we have in the game. It would be fairly strong, yes, but not too strong. It wouldn't be Ganyu's DPS levels of broken, or Zhongli's shield levels broken. More importantly, though, it would be fun. Can you imagine having 2 Guobas down at the same time? Or, again, using Xingqiu's E skill basically 3 times in a row if you have the sacrificial sword or whatever it's called. Before we move on to the next possible fix, please consider subscribing. It would mean a lot to me, it's free, and you can always change your mind later. Okay, let's center back in on reality. The next option Hoyoverse could take would be allowing us to build Miko into more of a main DPS if we so pleased. Her normal attacks are really cool and pretty looking, so let's center the idea around that. I would modify her second passive ability, the one about elemental mastery. I understand if they didn't want it to be energy recharge because that would be a little too similar to Raiden, so let's just continue with EM. Also, let's add an additional point to this passive that says something along the lines of every point of elemental mastery Yae Miko has will increase normal attack damage by 0.45%. To put this number into perspective, let's say you don't build any EM on Miko herself and instead use Sucrose to give her a boost of 200 EM. Miko's normal attack damage would be increased by 90%. And if you slightly invested into Miko's EM as well as used Sucrose for a total of 400 EM, she'd be sitting at about 180% damage increase. That might sound broken, but my insanely cracked Miko only deals around 4 to 5,000 damage per normal hit anyway, meaning the new damage would be around 12,000 with some investment, which is still a lot lower than my Eula, who hits for over 20,000 each hit. It's also important to note that this buff would not affect charge attacks because her charged attacks are already pretty good. They already do fairly good damage. Also, her turrets would still be getting buffed, and with 400 EM, that would be a 60% buff, meaning a 180% damage increase for her normal attacks and a 60% buff for her turrets. So even if she was only dealing 12,000 damage with her normal attacks, her turrets would still be hitting for around maybe 16,000, meaning you would definitely be able to do a very good amount of damage. Oh, and that's using my Miko's numbers, which is a 10-10-10, perfectly certified badass Miko. The point of taking this path would just be to make Miko into a DPS, or rather allowing the player to make Miko a DPS if they want to. Let's just be honest, a main DPS character will almost always be more fun than a sub DPS, simply because you see them much, much more. Well, that is pretty much everything I have for today. Please leave a comment letting me know how insane I am for trying to fix a character that's already good. Remember to like and subscribe. Hope to see you next time.